Right, and now I'm going to record and go.
Hi, I'm Renee Stillings. I'm with the School of Russian and Asian Studies, otherwise known as SRAS. And a little bit about us, about myself personally, I've been the founder, director of the School of Russian and Asian Studies now for, I guess we're approaching 25 years. Our focus has been the post-Soviet space for the most part, Russia, Central Asia, Central Europe, including Ukraine, Poland, and the Caucasus, and most recently into Cuba. So we really have an experience of, I would say, challenging locations. So our entire history has been full of challenges. None of these challenges, of course, have really stacked up to the recent challenge we are facing right now. But nonetheless, I think have equipped us well to deal with it and to perhaps lend a bit of insight to what might be ahead when dealing with I would say, a moving or shifting environment. Again, our geography that we're working with, the post-Soviet space, has been one that's provided us with a lot of rich material, allowing for a great diversity of topics, going beyond language study into areas of environment, security studies, international relations, economy, business, music, arts, theater. We're really blessed with the ability to go deep on a wide range of subjects, something I can honestly say is not possible in every part of the world. We've been able to really just go deep where we are, and it's had no reason for us to really go beyond that geography. In addition, I've said this to many classrooms that I visit, that we also are working with students who are smarter than the average bear, so to speak. It's a mini honors college, so this really also gives us a lot to work with. Our students do more writing than getting into trouble. So it's really an exciting environment for us, and I guess what we're here to talk about a bit is the future of study abroad and what this current crisis or situation we're in, whether it will or will not have an overall impact on study abroad. That's something in part that remains to be seen, but I have some thoughts on that. And I'm here with Michael Denner, professor of Russian at Stetson University. We've worked quite closely with Stetson for many years in questions of study abroad. They serve as a school of record for many of our programs, so we just have the ability that we take advantage of quite often of really just discussing what directions we should take programs in and what the market needs and where some of our visions might take us. So maybe, Michael, you could talk a little bit about from where you're coming from and your world there at Stetson and studies in Russian.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Denner. I'm professor of Russian studies at Stetson University, which is a small private liberal arts college in the center of Florida, far away from California, far away from Russia. But I studied abroad myself many years ago. I completed my undergraduate degree at Indiana University in 1992, and I studied abroad while I was a student at Indiana, and then I went back and taught in Russian schools in the early 1990s. So I was really there front and center as the Soviet Union broke apart. I studied in a place called Leningrad that stopped being Leningrad in like 1992, and I worked in Moscow. So then I got my graduate degree at Northwestern University and started to teach at Stetson University in August 2000, and I've taught here for the last 20 years. I've probably taught elementary Russian 25 times. I've been to Russia, Central Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus more times I can count. My current research involves foodways in Georgia. That's the Black Sea country, not the peaches state here in the United States. And Stetson's been working with SRAS for, gosh, it's getting close to 20 years now, and we've sent dozens and dozens of students over through SRAS to Russia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan and Poland now. And I've worked closely with Renee on the academic side of things for many years, including being the school of record for School of Russian and Asian Studies. That is to say that for some of the programs that SRAS runs, we issue transcripts. So I've been sort of an academic asset for the School of Russian and Asian Studies over the last couple decades, and thought a lot about study abroad, sent a lot of students to study abroad, and have been an advocate for study abroad here at Stetson University. So I just wanted to ask Renee, like, if you were to just describe in a few sentences where you are right now with study abroad. That is to say, what are your students doing? How are you coping? Tell me a little bit about what it's like to own a company that specializes in study abroad in this time of coronavirus.
Okay, well, say if we were to talk about literally today this morning started with a conference call with Bishkek, which involved sort of some final not so much final details, but those intermediate details of scheduling students to complete their online courses, addressing sort of some issues in terms of whether there are certain courses that won't work very well in an online regime. Maybe students might want to drop a course, add another course that will work better in this new mode. That was a great part of it in terms of today. That's sort of the stage we're in right now. The last 2 weeks were spent, of course, in, I guess you might call it, evacuating students in a certain way. So that's pretty much, I think, all completed now as of yesterday. And all students are back home, and we're in that mode that everybody is in really this week. The universities in Russia, universities here, everybody is in this massive move to the online regime of study at this point. So that's a lot what's going on this week. We're really looking forward to that all sort of getting settled, the dust settling and everybody getting into a pattern. We're all looking for routine in our lives right now, of course. And so, in that regard, we're looking to get that in place and then to move on to, I think, what we're calling just a lot of ideas that have been sitting on back burners for quite a while that suddenly have either increased in importance at this particular time, or even newer ideas that are coming about as a result of this particular crisis.
Just to give people an idea of what we're dealing with here, approximately how many students did you have studying abroad, let's say, within this semester, and in what locations?
We probably, I think it's around 30, 35 students, I think, and they're primarily St. Petersburg, Moscow, Vladivostok, Kiev, and Poland. So that's, bringing them from a lot of locations back to home and figuring out which locations as well can actually do the online instruction for what we need. So there's a little bit of consolidation there as well.
And you managed to get all of the students back to the States and before the borders closed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of course, I can call it misinformation, bad messaging that's out there, and some of it did cause our students to really jump and almost run to the airport when they caught wind that so-called borders are closing. But it doesn't exactly mean that. It means that they're closed to foreigners, and that's what's happened in every country. The Americans can always come home. Mm-hmm. It was very poorly messaged, but they could get home. There was a lot of disruption, of course, in terms of what flights you could take to get home, what airports you could arrive into.
So the next item in your academic cycle, I suppose, must be summer study abroad. Do you have plans? Have you managed to come up with ideas for what you're going to do with study abroad for students planning to spend this summer 2020, starting in around May and ending around August, in short-term programs in the areas that you service?
Yes, I think a few things have happened. First of all, we've consolidated into a fewer number of programs just out of necessity. We recognize, as everybody does, that the market will be much smaller this summer for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which are individual universities in the U.S. also making their own policies, that there will be no study before June 1st, before July 1st, none at all. There's a lot to contend with there. We recognize that what's needed right now is time. We all need time. We need to see what happens. So the way we've structured things, a few different things, in terms of just general applications, keeping students on some track, and at least giving us all some, we all need, of course, other than time, is hope that all returns to some sort of perhaps new normal at some point, the ability to delay the decision as much as possible. So that means extending deadlines, extending the period during which we will still refund all deposits, because we have a timeline when we incur costs, but some things just need to start, such as the Russian visa process. So a lot of this will be done in terms of just giving the students as much time as possible, and with other decision makers in their lives to make a decision. In addition to that, we're looking at a model now that we hope to roll out quite soon that would also, I guess, assist in mitigating this with a hybrid model of study, allowing for some part of that to be studied online while we play the waiting game even further.
So I think let's be relatively optimistic here and take it for granted that things are going to be back to normal or a new normal come the end of August or September. And so you'll recommence study abroad in situ in place, maybe integrating some hybridized learning and digital technology into the study abroad. But why don't you sketch, I know it can be only a thumbnail sketch without a lot of detail, what the student who's going to be studying abroad in the fall in 2020 in August can expect. I know there are lots of gears here turning and that you're not in control of them all, but like, let's just suppose that I'm a student at Stetson University planning to spend the fall semester abroad in one of SRAS's programs. What do I expect?
I mean, I think obviously in terms of the lead up to that, similarly as with summer, some more flexibility, of course, in that decision-making process. That we just have to factor that in with everything right now. At the same time, going towards the fall, I don't see us canceling any programming that we have currently. I don't see any reason to do that. In terms of what might be different on the ground, I think this stems from a little bit of what might be more global changes in study abroad or travel in general, which would be the recognition of study abroad and travel for what it is or what it should be, which is much more of an intensive experiential part of your life. That's while the classroom experience is part of that, it's only one part of it, and that there's going to be, even after, particularly after so much of this self-isolation, as we would call it, an online world, that there's going to be even more of a desire to reconnect. I heard from one of my colleagues today that there are some that are speculating that there might be a big lull in study abroad this fall, that students are going to actually want to reconnect with their peers on campus after having been gone for the whole spring. And not necessarily want to go abroad. I think that may be a factor in the broad scheme of things with study abroad. I do think that, as I pointed out in many other ways, our students are a little bit different. They have a need to study abroad that's a little bit different from the students who are just being told to study abroad because it's something we should all do. It's more critically apparent why a student of language would need to study abroad and to learn more about the culture that they're studying. So I think it'll have somewhat less impact on our students and other students where it's required to study abroad as part of their education. It'll probably have a much greater impact in those areas where it's much more of an option that it's suggested but not required. But I think overall, I've been reflecting a lot in the last few days, and having a little bit more time to think in between the various crises. And I find myself thinking in two directions. One is forward to thinking about where do I want to go next as soon as I can. And I'm already sort of actively thinking about that. It's like I need to go somewhere. It's in my blood. That's something I'm always doing. And also even just reflecting back. And I found myself thinking frequently the last few days that I'm glad I took that trip in January. And I find myself just reflecting on what I did in January and little things. And particularly as I see things being put out there, such as virtual museums. In fact, I just had a discussion today about that with somebody in Russia, and I thought, well, this is nice that these are out there in a virtual format. But then I looked back and I thought, I had this wonderful time at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and the one thing that I think back to is that I couldn't see the main feature there, the altar, the Pergamon altar, because it was under reconstruction. And not once did it occur to me that, I'll just knock that off my list by going to the online version of it.
Yeah.
What it did is it convinced me that the next time I can go to Europe, I'm going to go back to Berlin as soon as that exhibit is open. So I don't know that we're going to transition everything into the virtual world. I think we're going to be very selective about it. And I've often thought as well that I learn the most about a place that I'm going to travel to before I get there, because I've gone through all of the information and decided what I need to learn or ahead of time and what I want to experience there. And I think there might be a little bit more of this critical approach to travel and study abroad, and sort of separating what is it that I can learn through a book, through a movie, through some other format, versus what I really want to actually experience in person.
So I'll say a little bit about study abroad from a faculty teaching perspective in a second, but I wonder, do you see any upside to this pandemic that we're experiencing now? You sounded really optimistic there for moments, and I was wondering if you...
I think I do. I think that the threat that I see right now is not from the pandemic itself. I see that the threat is a possible serious economic downturn, which of course has some impact on study abroad. It's usually a little bit delayed in the sense that we noticed this in 2008, that there is an initial wave of students who are already committed. It's a requirement for them, particularly again in our world, it's more requirement based than necessary. So it's a little bit of a delay, and then within like the next year, if there's a serious problem where we have parents unemployed and just general economic situation that prevents it, there's a threat. In terms of the virus itself being the threat or the pandemic being the threat, I don't view that as the actual threat. I think if anything, it's causing a bit of a rethink. I mean, there's all these articles coming out right now on what are some fundamental changes in all of our lives that may come about because of this. And there's theorizing, but there is some truth in all of them. It's pushing a jump start into a lot of areas that we're dragging along and needed the change. So that will likely impact study abroad in some way as well. But I generally view it certainly not as a negative, at least neutral, and I think there are some upsides to it all. I think in how we message students and just the whole what we're seeing in general with everybody. We have time on our hands. We're now really thinking about how we want to spend that time, and the experiential side of connecting with people, undertaking things that we didn't have time to for the last however many years that we were too busy. And I think travel is part of that. It's on everybody's list of everything they regretted not doing enough of.
Mm-hmm. So I'll end up this discussion and I'll say some things off the cuff that I've been thinking but haven't really articulated. So don't expect a lot here. First off, I'd observe that maybe this pandemic has taught us the ultimate artificiality of borders. It's pretty obvious that viruses don't regard national borders, and that the response to these sorts of events calls on us to think of ourselves not as national units, but as a sort of a global response. And maybe I could see this crisis developing those strains in our education that are oriented towards a global awareness, an awareness of the world as a single entity. And certainly that's what we've learned, that we're at a point in the development of the world economy, the ways we interact both economically and culturally that don't recognize clear-cut borders. And maybe part of overcoming those borders is learning more about other countries and the way that other people live. And so I'm guardedly optimistic that this pandemic will push us to think beyond our borders and become even more globally aware. We're not going to solve this. No single country, no Russia, no China, no US is going to solve the problem of this pandemic, much the less future pandemics. So I'm a little hopeful there. I'm also hopeful that this experience will lead faculty instructors in the United States to appreciate the true value of study abroad, which, as you said, tends to be experiential. I'll tell you from the faculty perspective that typically, not every faculty member, hashtag, typically we faculty think of sending our students abroad and they'll take a bunch of classes and then they'll come back. And we don't give study abroad much of a thought beyond the strictly academic teacher to student interaction. And that I think we will learn is less important. That is to say that students will be resistant if we frame study abroad solely as an academic transition from a classroom here in the United States to a classroom in Ukraine or Poland. And we need to learn to start talking about the inherent value of just spending not a week, not a month, but months immersing oneself in another way of seeing the world. And then the last thing is it's really taught me the value of my time that I've spent abroad. Like I said, I've been in the game, well, for something like 25 years, at least. And I've met a lot of people from all over the world, and it's made me sort of appreciate on a more human level the nature of this pandemic. And so I'm deeply worried about my friends in Georgia, and I write them and I find out what the story is on the ground there, and in Ukraine. And so at the same time that we're conducting our usual sorts of intellectual and scholarly interactions and business and interactions, it's really brought home the different approaches, the different reactions, the different cultural, I don't know, nature of how each country is reacting to this, some better than others. And so that's also made me really appreciate the time that I've spent abroad. And again, this is not something I could possibly have learned in a classroom. So I'm guardedly optimistic. Like you, I see sort of a trough in the next 6 months or a year. I think that's natural. I also think it's natural that everybody spends the next year reorienting themselves and finding their own purpose within themselves. And I'm somewhat hopeful that 5 years out, we're going to look back at this pandemic and think of it as opening up new opportunities and requiring us to think in ways that are outside of our comfort zone and exploring new ideas and new technologies and new approaches to learning. Let's hope for that. Okay. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to the discussion?
I think I wholeheartedly agree with this shift to a much global approach to thinking that that the planet is one organism, and this lack of borders. And I think that it's the way it is hitting home is all these comparisons to how is this country handling this, how is this country handling this. This is it's a right in our face comparative study of why does this work in one country and what another and not in another. Yeah. And it's just pointing out why we need to understand how certain countries operate.
Absolutely, it occurs to me in 3 years, every social science and natural science paper will be about different responses and the effectiveness of those responses in each country. So one way to think about this is that we're providing a grand test of a country's preparedness and reaction and the validity and functionality of each of those reactions. And so another reason to study another language, another reason to spend considerable time in another country is that what we've learned in the United States certainly is that we do not have all the answers. And other countries have thought in different ways, in novel ways, in original ways, and in specific ways that might prove to be very useful for the.
We have a visual scorecard every day,
yeah.
Essentially. It's something we can see play out on an hourly, if not daily basis. So, and one other point that kind of came to mind as well is there's a little bit of talk about how this might cause people to rethink even academic conferences, and do we really need to meet? And I can tell you one thing: I think that the ACES conference and I guess it's back to November this year, people are going to be just happy to see their colleagues from all over the world.
Actually, my thought is that if anything, this is going to teach us more. Like I see how now everybody's like, oh, the business meeting, now we're just going to do it all by email. But like as a person who does meetings all day, every day, it sometimes seems to me it's basically my job. I think to myself, no, it's just the opposite. I actually want to see these people. You can't make effective decisions. You can't have effective discussions through email. It requires face-to-face contact. It requires extensive contact. It requires this sort of naturalness that only occurs when you're in the presence of another person. So if anything, I actually think that we're going to learn through this crisis that social interaction and face-to-face interaction, and not obtruded by some screen like we're doing right now, is all the more important. So, but I tend to be a contrarian and maybe an optimist at the same time. My battery's about to run out, and we've been doing this for about 25 minutes, which was our goal. And so I'm going to say goodbye to Renee Stillings with School of Russian and Asian Studies, SRAS, and I'm Michael Denner, Stetson University, and this is a probably one-off future of study abroad. Thank you very much.